Hello, and welcome to this video production, this discussion of the Opium Wars. Okay, backstory. Aaron Chan, I do about once a month a history, politics, government video, mainly from my own interest, but maybe I'm considering somebody else might be interested in watching it. A Facebook friend and viewer, Aaron Chan, asked me a couple of months ago, could you do a video on the Opium Wars? I said, well, okay. I thought it was an odd thing to ask, but figured why not. So I said, I have some other things I got to do, though, first, so you'll have to wait. Okay, he didn't mind. Now, I got this Bud Ice, which I bought for a taste challenge. Not the greatest beer in the world, certainly far from the worst. Generally pleasant. Okay, so now you say the Opium Wars. Now, what's up with that? I never heard of that. Maybe you might have heard about the war on drugs. Well, yeah, the war on drugs. We can see how successful that is since no one uses drugs anymore. But this would be like a war to be able to sell drugs, but it's a little bit more. Rolling Rock says, hello, good sir. Hello, Rolling Rock. A little bit more complicated than that. I'll try to make it simple. I was cutting grass with all that dust. I can see. I can see that it's going to get to me a little bit. All right. Okay. Yummy. I want a Bud Ice, he says. Yeah, it's all right. I did a few beer reviews today and drank different products. But anyway, so like, all right, I'm going to try to, I was thinking about this, how I'm going to set it up, because I don't want to go into extreme detail. That's not necessary. Like, and then they had this battle, and then they had that battle, and this guy maneuvered that way with the ships. And that's details which really aren't important in the overall view of it, and I'll tell you why. The general synopsis is this. Okay, the British were a growing empire in 1839, the world's most powerful empire. And they had been following this imperialistic, whatever you want to call it, endeavor, calling, like Rudyard Kipling, almost like it was a religious calling, right? Since 1689, when they had the Glorious Revolution, 1688, and then the Protestant regime came into power. Finally, it seemed like, okay, we got Great Britain under control. We got, we got Ireland under control as well. The next step is we're going to bring the world under our control, which you could see has basically been the game plan for 329 years. All right, so we're not going to go through everything. They started exploring America. They had already been doing that really since 1603 or even before, exploring and setting up colonies, and then down in South America, Asia, Africa. So, by they had lost America, the 13 colonies, big disaster for the British. That's another big story, which is a very strange story when you start to think about it. Anyway, strange when you consider the history of the world since 1775. You begin to wonder why that ever even occurred. But, what was the purpose for it? But, so you got this growing British Empire. By 1839, the United States is more and more becoming latched onto this, okay? You have the Monroe Doctrine, developed by Great Britain, the British Empire, but framed as a U.S. proposition, okay? They had a tendency to do this. Excuse my, I guess I shouldn't have done that very dusting mowing back by the canal and then do this. But so you have sort of like the senior partner, the British, which today is, it's kind of flipped. America, the child is now the senior partner. The parent has gotten old, a little senile, whatever. But and the child is now starting to get long in the tooth and become sort of disoriented. But so by 1839, you got the British and their child, America, working very closely. And later on, you know, in 1900, they developed the open door policy in China, presented as an American proposition, but certainly developed at the British Foreign Office and the Privy Council and all this. Okay, so and the reason behind that is because, you know, at the time, the United States of America was framed, or presented, I should say, as this land of the free, and we're against empires, we're against monarchies, all this stuff. And there's that old British, you know, those imperialists, and it just looked better to frame these things under the American brand. Now that doesn't really work anymore, because people can see that, oh, well, it's just two branches of the same operation, this imperialist, whatever you want to call it, Anglo-American axis would be a good description, I think. So, all right, we'll go back, like I said, to 179 years ago. The British had already pretty much become entrenched in India, but not officially, just entrenched. And then in 1876, they created the Empire of India. Of course, the British Queen was the Empress of India. But there's China next door, and so the British say trade. Okay, they want to trade with everybody around the world. Okay, and of course, free trade. And there was that whole idea of mercantilism, right? Mercantilism, and that concept that there was a limited amount of wealth in the world, which we know today is unrealistic, because you would have to assume that the world was in stasis and never changed, which we know it doesn't happen. But that was the mindset then, mercantilism. So there's a limited amount of wealth, so you want to capture as much wealth as possible in the form of gold and silver. So you want as many exports as possible, manufactured goods going out, and commodity money, you know, the old money, the real money, silver and gold, coming in. Now we use fiat money, the certificates of debt, the debt certificates, but that's another story. But anyway, so that was the idea. So exports out, imports in, and that's the whole reasoning behind the empire, because you've got this world empire, and it's sort of like a biodome, right? It's a self-enclosed trading system, and you discourage trade outside the empire with France, Germany, Spain, Portugal, whoever, right? Okay. That perhaps, because that's a mystery, but perhaps that had something to do with sparking the War of the American Revolution, because they didn't want to follow the program, right? The trade within the sphere. Okay, so, but let's go to China. The British are manufacturing goods, and then they're starting to develop all this, what you call plantations in India. All right. One of the hot items to trade was opium, very addictive drug, opioids, you know, opiates, or opiates at the time, opiates, very addictive, painkiller. So you sort of have a captive audience, right? And the Chinese, they start, and now remember, the Chinese are under the Qing dynasty, the Ming dynasty. The Manchus from Manchuria, the Qing dynasty, or the Manchu dynasty. They took over in what, 1644? Okay. So the Chinese people looked at them as sort of like foreigners, non-Chinese people, but whatever. They're the emperors, so all right. And that was their experience. Dictatorial government from the imperial city, Peking. Okay. They were very powerful, 1644, 1744. You know, they're the most advanced country in the world. So they don't need to learn. They had a very racist ideology in the sense that China is the premier country in the world. We have the best technology and the best standard of living. So there's nothing we need to learn from the rest of the world. You know, the world can go to hell, basically. We're the middle kingdom. We are what counts. Now, at the time when China was the premier country in the world with the best technology, you could get away with that, right? We are what matters. Fine, great. We rule China and Mongolia and have a lot of control over Korea, Vietnam, everything. Okay, Taiwan. And the Chinese had launched missions of exploration, much like Spain with, you know, the Spanish kingdoms with Columbus. So, and Portugal, and they explored Africa and all this, but they said, nah, there's nothing over there. We don't care about that. That's like junk countries. So their mindset after these explorations was, we don't need any of that. You know, China's what matters, and we're insular, and we only care about China. So screw the rest of the world. Very bad decision in the sense of protecting their own integrity, because, you know, you had the white countries, France, Portugal, Spain, the Dutch, the Dutch states, and the British, England. They got this different idea. We're going to go out and explore, have all these adventures. We're going to spread Christianity, and we're going to set up colonies or, you know, foreign territories around the world, and we're going to bring in all this money. So they have this very focused idea. We're going to bring in money and we're going to get rich. Okay. Whereas the Chinese are sort of aloof to that. They were already rich. They didn't need to go to Congo. They don't need to go to Cape Town, you know. So it's a recipe for disaster, because they just don't advance for 200 years, 1644 to 1844, let's see. Whereas you got this incredible amount of technological advancement in the Western countries. Oh, wow. And then you got the most aggressive Western country, the British, right? All right, I'm going to get some water, so I'll be right back. Hold on. So then you got this fixation on balance of trade, balance, like you hear about with President Trump today, balance of trade imbalance. Okay, so here's the British exporting opium from their poppy fields in India, mainly, not all exclusively, but mainly into China. So the Chinese say, oh, well, the emperor says, oh, no, this is bad because a lot of our people are getting hooked on this stuff. And then you have the societal breakdown, like you see in the United States today with the opioid crisis. You know, people that let trash pile up in their yard, they're all hooked on drugs. They play video games all day. They do nothing, you know, steal out of people's garbage, steal out of people's house, you know. And so you start seeing the same type of breakdown in China, and they say, oh, no, we don't want these white devils bringing this stuff over here. These foreigners, these barbarians. Where they even looked at the Japanese as barbarians. The nickname for the Japanese was dwarf slaves. So we don't want these people, these hairy people coming over here. They had allowed the British to trade through certain ports like Canton, but they say, no, we don't want opium coming over here. So you can't sell opium. What if you want to sell chocolate or some kind of toys? That's fine. We don't care. But as long as we get a cut, that's not a problem. But opium, no, that's bad business. So drugs is a dirty business. And, you know, it's sort of like a movie you might be familiar with. The Chinese tell the British, you know, we don't care what a man does for a living, as long as, you know, but your business is a little dangerous. So, you know, we wish you good luck, as long as especially since your interests don't conflict with our interests. Well, that's the problem. The interests do conflict, because the British see that there's a lot of Chinese imports, whatever it was. There's all kind of stuff from China. So there's stuff coming in and there's silver going out, but they don't want it like that. They want at least a balance. even at least. And one thing that could bring in a lot of silver and gold is opium. And then their British mind, the Chinese rules don't matter. They say, oh, no, we got to have free trade. Meaning we can do what we want. It's your country is our country. Like, the Mexicans say, mi casa, su casa. Well, the British say, su casa, mi casa. Your house is my house. So, oh, no, boy, we're going to trade opium in your country. All right, so they just keep delivering it. And there's enough corrupt people in China, a very corrupt country. So they're on the pay, they're getting the yayo. So he keeps coming in, and there's more and more people getting hooked on the dope. So the Chinese say, oh, okay, you want to play rough? We'll play rough. So they seized a bunch of opium in 1839, and they burned it 20,000 tons or whatever it was. So that the number is irrelevant. A bunch of it worth a lot of money. Well, you see, it's kind of interesting because they were looking for a pretext anyway. The British their attitude was, we're going to trade opium in China. I mean, it's going to happen. We'll do it either peacefully or we'll have a war. Right? So, but they always look for these pretexts. And it's interesting that their adversary will always give them the pretext. You know what I mean? Whether it's 1839 in China or 1939 in Europe, for instance. It's like they give them the pretext and they get attacked. And these countries, they never realize they're being set up. You know what I mean? It's like, it's strange that you don't see you're being set up. They're not going to go to war with you if they don't think there is a more than reasonable chance that they're going to win. Okay. And in 1939, well, okay, that applies. But in 1839, they think the chance of victory is almost a certainty. So let's let them fall for the trap. So they do it. Burn the opium. The British say, oh, what an outrage. It's like Pearl Harbor, They burnt our opium. Same old garbage. So they got all their people over there. They know China's technology is pitiful. Was nice in 1644, but this is 1839. And they got modern warships. The British have the best in the world in 1839. Well, they had the best in the world in 1939. They actually have the best in the world today. Technology. Their army's small and their navy's kind of small today, but it's very powerful, by the way. Argentina found that out to their detriment. But so they say, oh, okay. So they're going to retaliate. They're going to send in these modern British warships against these Chinese junks. You've seen the junks, these old, almost like Renaissance era warships. Well, you know the result. They blast the Chinese apart. It would be like Ohio State University versus a junior college. That bad. Total blowout. They're just beating the Chinese like a dog. Whipping them up. It's 100-to-1 kill ratio. It's terrible, horrible. And the Manchus, the Qing dynasty, they just caught off guard. They're so, flabbergasted. They can't believe it. The great China getting beat by these white animals, these foreign. They don't even know where England is on a map. There's some outlier country on the other side of the world. Animal people. They're not even real people. How can they do this to us? Well, and the British had been having problems with China since the 1700s, because when they would send an ambassador to China, they would say, oh yes, you're the Chinese emperor, oh boy, and we represent the great George III, Hanover, House of Hanover, the great British king, blah, 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 Elector of Hanover, Emperor of the Seas, or whatever, king of all his dominions, King of Ireland, King of England and Scotland. The Chinese say, we don't give a damn about that. Who the hell is George III? and they would say, we're the Chinese, we're the emperor, we're the Mings, we're the celestial empire. And they would demand, really, they would demand that you bow down to them and kowtow to them. Other countries like Portugal, they'd play the game. They don't care about all that. You know, they'd say, all right, they bow down on the ground in front of the throne and all that stuff. You know, oh, great Chinese emperor. You'd have to do it like 3 times. Oh, ruler of the universe, and all of this funny business. And they'd say, oh, blah, blah, blah. And can we trade with you? Oh, a great celestial entity and all of this. And the Chinese emperor would, you know, he would always speak in some weird ancient dialect. We, the celestial divinity, deign to trade with the Portuguese worm and all of this, you know, and then the Portuguese would trade with China all around, and Macau, even up until 1999, the Portuguese owned Macau. Yeah, the last Chinese city owned by a European country, 1999, only 19 years ago. You may not be aware of that. But the British, they don't operate that way. They say, oh no, we don't bow down on anybody's ground. That's the British way. You know, they say you're pompous, but you never met pompous. You know, you don't know what pompous is. We're going to show you. So they would not kowtow. They were actually not allowed to do that. The British ambassador would go in there, you know, with their attitude and say, I'm not going to kowtow to you, you damn Asiatic potentate. I represent George III. I'm on the 18. Why would I kowtow to class, you know, to Division 3? You know, Great Britain don't play that. So they had all these friction, you know, they would not play the game. You know, their attitude, the British attitude was, you bow down to us. You see that flag? With the red, white, and blue, the cross, that's St. George Cross. That's the flag of England, Scotland, and Ireland. Way better countries than this 2-bit Chinese thing. And that was really the attitude they would present. They would go to their capital and say, you know, you can go to hell. We're Great Britain. Screw you. And then they would say, you want to trade? That was the attitude they had. And the Chinese say, what is this? What kind of people is this? And that's just the way they would operate. So, you know, it's just going to lead to trouble. So now, all right. So what do you think the result is? 1839. And this is a major war for China. They're getting piled up. I mean, this is the great, and the Chinese people think, oh, the great emperor, we must worship the emperor. You know, he's so powerful. Now they realize this great emperor is sort of like the Wizard of Oz. He's like, pay no mind to the man behind the curtain. He can't beat his way out of a wet paper bag. Here's these white animals coming across the ocean and pushing them around like they're nobody. You see what I mean? So the Chinese start to say, whoa, wait a minute. Well, okay, to cut to the chase, in 1842, China basically surrendered and signed a treaty and gave Hong Kong to Great Britain in perpetuity. In other words, Great Britain owns Hong Kong forever, and it became a British Crown colony. They gave it back to China 21 years ago, 1997, but they were actually not obligated to, because Hong Kong and Victoria, the capital, was forever. Now, the new territories, which they got later on, was for 99 years. That was the problem. They said, well, the lease is going to expire, and so we want the stuff back. So the British could have, you know, theoretically said, no, you're not getting it back. And they had a war with China in 1997, but, you know, they didn't want to do that. 1927, sure, we'll have a war. 37, not a problem. But by 97, nah, you know, you can have it back. We got enough money coming in anyway. All right, but this is 1839. So 1842, they signed a humiliating treaty. They give one of the Chinese cities to Great Britain. They had already given Macau to Portugal. And this begins that century of humiliation, you know, signing these what they call unequal treaties. Well, that was it. You know, that's it. Now everybody's lining up. United States, later on Italy, Germany, later on Russia, Japan, even France. Here they come, the French Empire. Oh, well, we want our cut. And then, so China starts to break down in the 1840s. And then you have this Taiping Rebellion, this weird sort of like death cult, this messianic, you know what I mean, millennialistic cult, quasi-Christian, violent, extremely hyper-violent cult that starts to form an uprising in China. And it took like 20 years to beat these people down. Like literally, you know how you listen to these bizarre radio shows, they got black helicopters landing in everybody's backyard and everybody's under mind control and they got fluoride and everybody's water and the radio signals are coming into your head. It would be like if these people had an army, you understand? But an army that was like 20 million people in the United States. So they start to have all these followers, these devoted followers to this new heavenly kingdom they're going to have in China. Well, naturally, if you don't go along with it, they're going to murder you. So these Taipings, they murder men, women, children. They don't care because they're bringing in the Lord's 1,000 years of peace. And you get these kind of crazy cults like you have in the Middle East today, or like the Khmer Rouge, or like the Reign of Terror in France with the Ancient Orient Lodge. The same old story. And they just go around murdering everybody. So the Chinese say, oh, we can't fight the white devils because we got to fight these maniacs. And that's, in some ways, the Chinese perception of Christianity today. They think Christianity is some weird death cult because that's their experience with this warped version of it in the 1830s. Oh, and you had the Zealots, remember, in Judea in the 1st century against the Romans in the 2nd century. These Jewish zealots, they go around saying, oh, Jehovah's going to come rescue us from the evil Romans, right? And they're going to rise up and they're going to kill all the Romans. And then they killed any Jews that didn't join them, of course. But, you know, the stone that was rejected became the cornerstone, right? So they didn't get the help in their delusional thinking that they thought they were going to get because they rejected the truth. And so what happened in the 1st and 2nd Zionist rebellion, the Zealot rebellion, the Roman army came in and massacred all of them. And it was a death cult because they kill all the Jews who don't team up with them. And they even kill their own children. Remember the Masada up there in Masada? They murdered their own children. So how crazy these people were, and which is peculiar because they celebrate that in Israel today. They they honor this, literally this death cult. But that's another story, very strange story. But so that Taiping rebellion just decimated China, like 20 million people killed. Blueberry OG says, what's up? I'm just talking about history in reference to Aaron Chan. So now that was the first Opium War. So then China starts to break down very rapidly. Just the whole country begins to break down. Their whole society begins to collapse. So you can imagine the people's regard for the Qing dynasty, the Manchu dynasty, is very poor. And then the British and the French Empire looked for another pretext. So there was a second Opium War, 1856 to around 60. They're going there, polishing off China, you know, going, Beer by the Number says, love the history talk. Oh, thank you. So they go in there whipping up on China. Again, China's so disabled, like literally disabled. They have to sign all these terrible treaties with the British and the French. So then the French start gaining territories in China, which they kept, by the way, until the 1950s, if you can believe it. So the British kept, and then the Germans come in, and everybody starts coming in and chopping up China. So And these foreigners kept territories in China up until 1999. The British gave up their last territory only in 1997, 21 years ago. Portugal only 19 years ago. And then Japan starts to grab Chinese territory. I'm about to smash the 12-pack of Coors Extra Gold. Oh, Corona Extra. I'm sorry. I hope that 12-pack's over a 3-day period. Anyway, so China's decimated. The Manchus lose their prestige or their esteem. They don't know how to correct the problem. They're sort of like the Bourbons in France. They know there's a problem. They don't know how to correct the problem. And so the drug abuse gets worse. The societal problems get worse, and China just collapses. So that leads to the Republican Revolution. I don't mean Republican like America Republican Party. I mean, they want to set up a republic in the 1890s. So then you have revolutionaries who start to operate in China, the Sun Yat-sen and all these other people. And then you have the uprising in China in 1911 to 1912, where they overthrow the Manchu dynasty. The last emperor is kicked out. Puyi, he died 51 years ago. And the last Chinese emperor did actually die 51 years ago. And so, but actually the Republic of China set up in 1912. Things actually get worse, not better, worse. Isn't that usually the case with revolutions? Because those people have pie in the sky ideas. They're good at overthrowing governments, not so good at running governments. You know, most of these revolutionaries are good at overthrowing. They're not so good at running, operating, administrating. So China falls down even worse. And then you have the communist revolution, which is, so it goes from like worse to worse to worse. So that's the result of this Opium Wars. Now you say, well, it might have fallen apart anyway. China was weak and backward. Well, yeah, it might have fallen apart. I don't know. But that's speculation. We know what did happen. We know what did happen, right? We're talking about what did happen, not what we think might have happened. China never could. It was like China never could grasp the situation. They seemed confused by what was going on the whole time. Up until, say, $1945, I don't know, pick a year. I mean, they were confused. They were obviously being used by people and not to their advantage. Okay. Now, this in a way leads to what we have with Japan, because the United States is right in there underneath the British nose, following right behind them on their coattails. And so they get infected by this imperialistic idea, the United States of America. We want to have an empire. So we're going to set up an empire domestically over the other states, right? Everybody's going to do what we want. And that goes to that war in the 1860s, right? 61 to 65. And we're going to take other people's stuff. And so United States started going to Japan in the 1850s and starting to demand that they do this and that. They're going to do Japan like they're going to do China. You know, we're going to kick Japan around. But the Japanese, they say, oh, no, you know. They had a revolution in 1867 where the Emperor's Party, what's called the Emperor's faction, takes over. And they're going to modernize Japan. No, we're not going to be taken over by these white devils. We're going to modernize our country, and we're not going to become a British or French or Russian or whoever colony. Okay, good idea. So the Japanese start going on what you call a crash course of modernization, right? Sending their students all over the world, Great Britain, France, Germany, learning technology. They don't go to France and study art. Oh no, they go to France and study technology. And that's all you're allowed to study. Mechanics, agriculture, modern technology. We don't care about the arts. Unfortunately for Japan, in Japan's case, they got infected by the virus they were trying to fight. They wanted to resist imperialism, but they got infected by imperialism. And I made videos about that already. They become imperialistic, and they start to grab land from China. And like someone who's obese, the appetite grows with the eating, or a gambler or a drug addict. The more they take, the more they want. And the more land China, start over. The more land China, start over. The more land Japan grabbed, the more they wanted. And so we know that Japan dug their own grave with their imperialism, their imperialistic endeavors, right? Which was a disaster. Was it a good idea to modernize and resist imperialism? Certainly. Who would argue against that? But they got infected by the virus. And we know the result there, don't we? Japan decided to get into this huge conflict, and then they fall into the same trap. They were more aware than China. Japan was more aware of what was happening, but they weren't totally aware. Right? They can't see that they're being set up in 1937, 38, 39, 40, especially 1941. They never could see that they're being set up. So we know what happens. They fall. Germany gets infected by imperialism, the virus of imperialism. They had never been infected by that before. And then they never could see that they were being set up in 1914. They never apparently could see that they were being set up in 1939. And it's interesting because you read all these articles that they wrote, and they talk about the British, they're out here doing blah, blah. Oh, yeah, but you can't see that you're being, it's amazing. They can't see that you're being, you're being played. You think you're in control of the situation. You're obviously not. And you can march around and scream and holler and talk about, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. You're not going to do anything because you're going down. The only thing you're going to do is go down, 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 down. 1941, 42, 43, 44, 45. So it's amazing that a lot of these countries, they don't, and we can go up to the modern day. Let's go to 2003. Saddam Hussein never could see he was being set up. Well, maybe by 2003, he realized that's it. I've been set up and it's over. I'm gone, Gaddafi never could see that he was being set up. I think Assad had enough awareness, and plus he's got a very good tutor, or we should say advisor. And Assad is saying, what's going on? What's happening? Why am I a target? And then he's got maybe Putin saying, look, we've been dealing with this since 1815. So the Russians say, look, you're being set up, and we're going to try to show you how to maneuver through this, okay? It's a very difficult thing to maneuver through. And we didn't do a very good job of maneuvering through it because you look at Russia, we sacrificed ourselves in 1914 for the ambitions of London. And then we did it again. $25 years later. So it's real hard when you're not the guy running the operation to see that you're being operated upon, So it's a sad thing. China was, that was easy picking. So they were set up and they were knocked down like a bowling pin, but then it just kept on going. You can just go through all these countries. We could just pick each country and just go through the program. So we're in 2018, right? So now we're seeing Syria. That's the program being applied to them. But they have an advantage in the sense that they have a very powerful benefactor headquartered in Moscow. And they're not getting pushed around. They're not dealing, we're not dealing with some old drunk in 1999, right? We're dealing with the mastermind. So he's not getting pushed around. So, even President Trump has to be very careful when he's messing around with another guy who's probably his equal or even better. So, and that's why you hear all the hatred about Putin, the evil Putin. Well, no, he's going to stand up to the program. You know what I mean? He's not he's not kowtowing, right? So it sort of brings us back full circle. He's the guy that's not kowtowing today. And, you know, you can kick China around in 1839 and get a good deal, make a lot of money, but you kick the Russian Federation around in 2018, you might not have a world. You know what I mean? You're not dealing with people that you're dealing with a much more dangerous situation. This is not 1939, where your prospects of victory are pretty good. This is a little different ball game, so we'll see how it develops. Thanks for watching this video about the Opium Wars, which really, when you think about it, it's just a piece of a puzzle, right? It's part of a much bigger picture. And I think if people are willing and open-minded to look at that, they can realize that. They should realize it. For their benefit, they better realize it. Thank you.